There has been this mainstay on itch for a few years now, the haunted PS1 demo disc collection. This is a compilation of small horror games that is released yearly, with each Halloween I believe, with some other compilations or smaller games done around the year also. It had caught my eye before, and even though I had approached this completely out of season, I really wanted to try it. So welcome back to Small Game Sunday, with some spooky November gaming. When you load up the game, you get this abandoned shopping centre with storefronts that represent each of the games within, but some are locked. As you proceed around them, you quickly realise that there are various Resident Evil and Silent Hill type tools for your inventory that will allow you to bypass things like chains or boards on the doors, letting you get to the sweet games. This housing for the games manages to evoke the PS1 style horror game through graphical stylings, draw distance and chunky objects to a very high standard. You quickly see why this style still remains effective to this day, the slight jankiness itself giving it an uncanny valley type creep. Now this is where I want to say this was a much meatier collection than I anticipated. I thought it would be something that I could just boot up, play for an hour or so and maybe play some other games as well. But it turns out after 3 hours I'd still not touched every single game within and I was actually out of time. So if everything I've said up to this stage and described at this moment seems appealing to you, just go and play this. It's a great little collection and it's free on itch. There is something about having a broad collection of demos and games that means you can just switch it up when you fancy. You don't end up getting bogged down with frustration. It's a tasting menu of a particular type and style of game that actually left me very full at the end. I think the best way to approach this from here on in is to talk about two specific games that I have right now wishlisted on Steam because they're good. House of Necrosis and Unchained. House of Necrosis right away caused a spike in interest because of how faithfully it recreates the introduction of Resident Evil. Everything from the mysterious deaths in the woods, the militaristic response from the police, and the occasional use of what looks like to be actual real world photos to set up the scene. If something's going to this obviously reference something, then it welcomes the interrogation of where it's going to diverge at all. Moving around the opening area you can see the usual staircase with 2 rooms off to either side. I naturally followed my Resident Evil instincts towards the way you're meant to go, and found the door blocked off, so I head to the other area. During this walking around section I noticed that the controls were fairly odd. Like, you let up on the movement and a few ticks of the game went and your character kept moving. Getting to the next area I found the same, and this was where enemies are, and they just seemed to swarm me in the corner with not giving me much of a chance to fend them off. Then came a revelation. I stopped for some reason, and the enemies decided to give me a break, only moving when I started. This is a roguelike. But like a traditional roguelike, where the world's temporal structure is completely controlled by the player. Everything moves when you move, but simultaneously, meaning you can stop to consider your situation for a moment before springing into action. You also need to judge how the enemies might respond. Can I get them finishing their move next to me? This means it's perfect time to attack. Can I get them in line with my guns? Because if they're not in line within the queen's moves in chess on the board that you're on, you will miss. As you delve deeper into randomly generated levels, you start picking up items flavoured by the mechanics. Herbs take your heals, gunpowder allows you to craft more ammunition, and you get this serum that acts as a potion with random effects that reveal themselves to you once it's taken. These can also be identified with an almanac in your inventory. You have this limited space. Actually, the part of the game where it's weakest, I fully endorse the limited space because it means you have to make decisions about what you're taking forward and what you're not. But in each of the levels you have to do this management on the floor, so it gets quite fiddly to do. And at the end of a set amount of levels you get the warm, brightly lit welcome of a safe room, giving you a chest to store these items and a moment of respite. All in all, this game aims to faithfully translate Resident Evil 1 into a roguelike, and does it with impressive capacity. Everything feels familiar to one of both of its parents, meaning that if you have an understanding of either, it's usually applicable here. The items do what you think they're going to do. It has done its basic sales pitch to me, and I'm very excited to see how it expands, hence the Steam wishlist. Our next game sells itself as being inspired by both Quake and Dark Souls, which is a lofty goal for sure. Unchained takes something from a lot of games, to be honest, but ends up making something pretty unique in the end. It has the movement speed, the accuracy and the lack of reloading of a boomer shooter, but with the added twist of the grappling chain. This allows you to attach yourself to any wooden posts in the world, moving around pretty quickly, useful for both combat and exploration. You also have a moveset considerably more expanded than a Quake, with a slide, double jump and wall jump. again useful for traversal, getting to hidden areas and combat. Getting around and exploration is probably the part where they are trying to mimic a Souls, but I think those games are so expertly crafted that it's hard to really ever match them. That being said, there's more technique to it in this game, with the combination of platforming as well as the grappling hook, as well as having a moment where I dropped down into an area, found that I was in an area I've been before, and had the ability to look up that entire time and go back to where I just came from. I could have just gone up there from the start. This is all brought together with the combat, probably of import when you're name checking both Souls and Quake. The movement, as discussed, is very Quake, but with all of these extra abilities. But the enemies have this health bar that ends up with them being staggered, meaning that you want to manage the stamina of a whole group of enemies effectively, whittling them down and then pouncing on their weakest. This is combined with the titular chain, which as a grappling hook can lift an enemy into the air. You can then juggle them, and then grab them, bring them back in, either for a swift kick in the gob, or punt them directly into their friend. I quickly concluded that it's a mistake to compare these games to other titles actually, because this game does so many unique things with all of these different abilities. Honestly, Bulletstorm feels like one of the closer comparisons, even if this manages to feel wholly unique by itself. I think it's worth talking about the aesthetic of all these games here. They aim to recreate an older style of how we remember it anyway. Maybe not completely faithfully, being experimental in some instances, but it completely evokes the aesthetic experience of playing these games in a way that is not just nostalgia. It could just be seen as cashing in on something from this era, but the more time I spend with games like this, the more I see how these limitations spring creativity, how the games capitalise on the style to produce story and a placeness. People going back to evoke these things seem to do so out of a fondness for sure, but also manage to find something worthwhile in these older styles that is lost in the crisp 4K graphics of today. Not to denigrate them, but they just do a different thing. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for watching this slightly late Small Game Sunday. As always, likes and subscriptions do the nice thing to my brain. Any other titles you want me to have a look at, then let me know. My name's been Billy. Peace.